Okay, and thank you, and I'll turn this over now to our Undersecretary of the Navy, Robert Work.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Everyone on this panel deals at the swirling intersection of strategy, policy, and budget. Our job is to organize, train, and equip the Navy Marine Corps team. So we thought it was appropriate to end the conference after we've spent the first day and a half speaking on all of the what might you build this fleet for, and to tell you how we're translating many of the themes that we've heard over the last day and a half into a Navy Marine Corps team that actually can do what its nation asks us to do. Now, if you all remember the maritime strategy, you could not have a discussion of the maritime strategy without talking about the 600-ship Navy. And we did not want to entitle this panel the 300-ship Navy, or the 450-ship Navy, or the 495-ship Navy. We wanted to talk about fleet design. What Dr. Roger just spoke about resonated with me very strongly. History is there, you have to know about it, but it's very dangerous if you use it incorrectly. The Navy Marine Corps team that we're building today is built for warfare in the guided munitions era. Comparing this fleet with any fleet before 1960, when we started to build ships from the keel up for guided munitions warfare, is a fool's game. In September 30th, 1987, that was the high point of the 600-ship Navy. There were 568 battle force ships on that day. That was the high point. From that point on, the fleet started to decline in numbers. 43 of the ships were strategic ships. 37 were SSBNs, 4 submarine tenders, which were focused directly on that force, and 2 supply ships, which would deliver missiles to forward bases. We had 19 mobile logistics ships that were designed to keep a steam fleet in the fight. 9 destroyer tenders, 2 repair ships, 8 additional submarine tenders. We had 102 submarines, 4 of them diesel-powered subs, and we had 17 high-value units, 14 deployable aircraft carriers, and 3 battleships. But let's just talk about the surface fleet on that date. There were only 36 guided missile cruisers. 27 of them were conventional powered, and 9 were nuclear powered. And of those 27, only 9 had the Aegis combat system. And of those 36, only 4 had the vertical launch missile system. We had only 37 guided missile destroyers, and we had 31 Spruance-class destroyers, great ships. 104 cruisers and destroyers, that was it. And we had an additional 115 frigates. The fleet that we're building today calls for 90 or so all guided missile cruisers and destroyers. The way you think about this is there have only been 54 guided missile cruisers that have been built from the keel up since the end of World War II. We've had a couple other conversions, but only 54, and 22 of them are in the fleet right now. We've only built 99 guided missile destroyers, and 62 of them are in the fleet right now. So comparing numbers, you have to be able to say, what is this fleet designed to do? Any surface warfare officer who tells you that they wouldn't rather fight the 84 Aegis VLS combatants that we have today than the 104 cruisers and destroyers that were a combination of steam power, nuclear power, gas turbine power, that had new threat upgrades. Some second-generation combat systems didn't have any upgrades. They would be crazy. So focusing just on the number gives you the wrong sense of history, and that's what this panel is all about. And I could make a very similar story for the U.S. Marine Corps that had 3 Marine Expeditionary Forces in 1987, but the three expeditionary forces that we have today are totally different. Now, to talk to you about this fleet design and why we're building the Navy and Marine Corps that we're doing, we couldn't have asked for a better panel. Admiral Pink Floyd, he's the Director of Warfare Integration in the new N9. So he can give you a good sense on what's happening in the Navy writ large. General John Whistler is the Deputy Commandant for Programs and Requirements, and he can give you a very good idea on what's happening across the entire Marine Combat Forces. Rick Hunt, we're very, very lucky to have a sitting fleet commander, the commander of the 3rd Fleet, as well as a type commander for Naval Surface Forces, who can tell you how hard it is to take what we're trying to do at the broader level and translate that into a fully trained and ready force. And finally, we have Sean Stackley, Secretary Sean Stackley, who is without a doubt the finest acquisition professional in the entire country. We are very lucky to have him. Don't screw it up, Sean. So what we're going to do is we're going to go right down the row. We're going to talk about 10 to 12 minutes apiece, and then we're going to throw it open to questions. And I'd encourage you to ask hard questions. Be skeptical. But we believe very strongly that the fleet, the Navy and Marine Corps team that we are building, is the right fleet for the future. Pink?
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thanks to all of you for your time. And for all the folks that are sitting out in the seminar that are graduating this Friday, congratulations. I hope a bunch of you have got slots in the Pentagon. Look forward to seeing you there. And I would say, based on my commute in this morning when I came around the circle at Mama Leone's and it was a parking lot, I think that you're well trained to come to the Washington area and prepare for work in the Pentagon. Seriously, it's great to be here, and I am gonna show you some PowerPoint. As you can see, I am from the Pentagon. It's what we do. I'm not going to show too many of them though, but I do want to talk you through kind of the thinking in fleet design over the last 60 or 70 years since World War II. As you can see up here, the defense strategy. You know, I sat in a seminar this morning and I heard pivot, 100 times. And that's a good word, but I think that I prefer to use the word refocus. Actually, which one is that? Here we go. Use realignment or refocus, or maybe for the Navy, it would be better to say rebalance. Because I don't think that you're going to see so much of a difference in day-to-day operations out there, because since we looked for coaling stations in the Great White Fleet, the Navy and the Marine Corps have been out there, and we're going to continue to be out there. And you may see our numbers shift around a little bit and where our ships are, but I think you would be challenged to see much difference in the way we operate out there. We'll continue to be there, and we'll be ready to fight, and we'll be ready to help, just like we have been. We have to be ready for the high-end conflict. We will be, but we recognize that most of the time we're not. Our day-to-day operations aren't at the high end typically. Challenging to predict the future. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on. We've had a number of discussions about that just yesterday. And then, of course, we never have enough force structure to meet the demand. The Department of the Navy is in high demand today and will continue to be so in the future. Let's see if I can get that thing there. So anyway, approaches to fleet design. If you looked at them from if you wanted to liken them to generations, the first generation would be from about 1945 to 1958. And it would be the transition from unguided munitions to guided. With the augmented radar in World War II, we started doing some guided work with unguided munitions. Ship design they started getting larger after World War II. There weren't a lot of new ships. We only built about 23 in that time frame. And we had a big anti-surface warfare, a submarine threat was out there, and our weapons didn't really match up with that. We did a little experimentation with smaller ships, the destroyer escorts, but ultimately they just proved to be too small to handle the combat systems required for guided weapons. The second generation would be from about the next 20 years, 56 to 76, somewhere in there, and that was a dedicated shift to guided warfare. You saw the first surface-to-air missiles show up in there, a wide variety of sonar and weapons pairings. We saw the first anti-submarine rockets. Lamps helicopter came out then. We also had the first use of automated computer-to-computer data exchange between ships and aircraft. We built about 60 new ships in that time frame, and they were built from the keel up for guided warfare. The threat really at the time was to protect the carrier battle group from the anti-surface missile threat as well as submarines. So you had to have some of the high-end ships in close to knock down those air-to-surface missiles, as well as screening ships to get after the submarine threat. And I think that is probably the first example of a high-low mix in our approach to fleet design. The size of the ships became even bigger because the sonars were located in the bow, as most people know. They were large, and it required a bigger ship. And they were upwards of 4,200 tons at that point. So for the third generation, from 75 to 89, this is probably characterized by, not only have we gone to guided warfare, now it's high-intensity guided warfare against specific threat, which would be the Soviet Navy. And in this time frame, we saw more and better SAM systems come up, surface-to-air missiles, and the beginning, the first vertical launching systems, vertical launch tubes in our ships and our submarines. There were new offensive weapons, Harpoon and T-LAM, new Lamps helicopter. There were a lot of innovation and new things that came out then. The fleet was a real mix: steam, gas turbines. The under just mentioned the Spruance class destroyers. We went to gas turbines across all our ships in this time frame, and we had over 25 different types of missile launcher. So the ships were getting bigger yet, and the smallest one that we really considered capable had to be able to carry a helicopter. So it was the FFGs. From a fourth generation standpoint, I think I'm still on the right slide there. That was about 88 to 01, and we were pretty much focused on land attack, network communications, data exchange. We had to rapidly stop any kind of an armored invasion, primarily into Europe. Strike was probably the key warfare area, and we focused that in those vertical launching systems that I talked about. And we were totally about being connected to the network. We saw new anti-air warfare systems with the spy radar showing up in our DDGs, and then you started hearing terms of network-centric warfare as we completed our netting. Anti-missile systems came in, and of course, global positioning system and inertial guided weapons came in as well. The fourth generation was probably highlighted mostly that it was just all about standardization. We moved away from our second and third generation combatants. If it didn't have Aegis or a VLS, vertical launching system, we moved on. We divested from the FF and moved on to the Perry class FFGs. We built out the Ticonderoga class, 27 ships, 57 Arleigh Burke DDGs, and we converted about 24 of the Spruance into T-LAM Tomahawk missile barges. So you can see we're going to this complete strike warfare situation there. And it's interesting to note that the 1997 Quadrennial Defense Review called for 116 ships. And the smallest one of those ships was 8,000 tons. So now we're at a high mix in these ships. Very good at high capacity land attack. Maybe overkill for the day-to-day kind of work, but mostly we discovered that it's unaffordable. So the fifth generation, I think it's me that's technically challenged here. See that? It's like changing. That's right. Okay, there we go. So for the fifth generation, you saw these slides yesterday morning when Secretary Work kind of kicked the thing off. So I'm not going to go into a lot of the details here, but know that fifth generation, as we're looking at it now, as we design the fleet today, is all about the total force battle network. And you know, you heard the under say that every platform's a sensor, every sensor is netted. So we're gonna optimize the platforms for sensors and payloads as our primary goal there. Now it's clicking. I'm going from black and white, very small, to kind of a color one that's up there that I almost need my. It'd almost be easier to. Oh, that's there. It's all good. But anyway, I am on the correct slide there. But our surface force now reflects this shift to the total force battle network. You know, the key operational problems you see listed there. We have to maintain that forward presence that I talked about when I first started talking. We have to maintain access into areas that are considered denial. And Generation 5 reintroduces the idea of this high-low mix. We'll have the large DDG all the way through carriers. I'll show you a slide about that in a minute, that are multi-mission and with modular capability in their weapons. And then we'll have a smaller multi-role combatant, which will be the littoral combat ship, which has modular mission packages. So so LCS, Littoral Combat Ship, it is what we're basing our small combatant design on, and I won't read you this slide, but it replaces a lot of our ships in the future. And this kind of gives you a snapshot of where we're going, from the high end, the carrier out on the right side, to our big deck amphibs, cruisers, DDGs, and then over to the littoral combat ship. So just real quick in summary, you see where we are now as a fifth gen. I hope you can kind of see what the thinking was as we came up to fifth gen. And I promised you I was going to talk just a little bit more about the, let's see, that slide didn't come through, but the comment about it's challenging to predict the future. You know, back in 1937, when the S&T first stood up, Congress asked a panel of experts to look out the next 25 years and come up with what are the things we should be investing in right now. And they came back a year later and they reported out, and some of the things that were not on the list in 1938 were computers, atomic energy, antibiotics, radar, jet propulsion, and intercontinental ballistic missiles. So when I talked with the panel a little bit about that at lunch, and Secretary Stackley asked me, so what did they get right? And I don't know the answer to that, but he's always asking those hard questions, you know. So anyway, that's all I have, Mr. Secretary. Thank you all very much for your time.
Secretary Work, thanks. Thanks to everybody who's still here. You're the diehards. I appreciate it. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit is how we're designing the Marine Corps for the future, what we think the key tenets of that are, and then talk a little bit about how we're going to try and get after the funding of that Marine Corps, because a dream without resources is a hallucination. It's kind of the thing I like to use in the Pentagon, and I don't have many friends on that point. It's great that I actually get to follow Dr. Roger today. I actually use some of his work. In a minute here, I'll use a quote from him, but more than that, discussing maritime forces and sustaining our role in maintaining global leadership, I think, is something that anytime you can get the Navy and the Marine Corps to talk about is a good thing. I'm going to talk about how we're going to meet those missions, our strategic framework, and then talk a little bit about resourcing. To say it's a tough balancing act would be an understatement, but it is part of the reality of where we are today, and I think where we'll be, at least for the foreseeable future. Geopolitics of the Pacific and the Middle East regions are absolutely perfect for the dynamic of maritime forces. We are a central component of the new strategy that has come out. We're working to reshape our global posture to make sure that we in the Marine Corps, the Navy Marine Corps team, meet the minimum essential commitments in all regions around the world while ensuring that we can deal with the things in the Pacific and in Central Command. I second Admiral Floyd's point that we never left the Pacific. We are rebalancing to the Pacific is probably better than the pivot. We've been focused for a long time, for 10 years in the Marine Corps in one area, but even during that period, we maintained our presence in the Pacific and have done so, I think, pretty successfully. Crisis response is where we in the Marine Corps, it's the focus of what we do and how we've redesigned, if you will, this new 182.1 thousand man Marine Corps. It's usually the capability that's required outside the focus of effort. So even if we were to look at the Pacific or Central Command and Asia and Central Asia, Southwest Asia as our focus, we would still need to be able to respond to other places in the world. I think two of the most recent examples of that are the Navy Marine Corps effort off the coast of Libya and the Navy Marine Corps effort in helping out our Japanese partners in Operation Tomodachi and their response after the tsunami. None of us were planning on doing tsunami relief, HADR work at that level, yet we did it, and we did it exceptionally well. And similarly, the Navy Marine Corps team carried the day, along with some great allied partners. And you cannot forget the allied partners. But that partnership of the Navy Marine Corps team and our allies really carried off something for the National Command Authority that we couldn't have done without those forces, not necessarily stationed in that region at this time, but be able to react there. Geostrategic challenges are shifting. We have new threats. You've heard all that earlier in the week. I won't replow that ground. What we really have to do, though, is think about how that impacts fleet design. It was touched on, I think, very well by Admiral Floyd, and also in our organization of the United States Marine Corps. Dr. Roger, in his second volume that was mentioned today, said this about fleet design. He said, "The proper question to ask of all ship designs is not how well they compared with one another, but how well they correspond to each country's strategic priorities and how wisely those priorities were chosen." He continued to say, "If there is a single lesson which can be drawn from the study of warships and their weapons," at this point I would insert Marines are actually weapons that come off of ships, "it is that the only useful measure of quality is fitness for purpose, and that the strategic judgment of what functions a Navy is meant to fulfill is even more important than technical skill or the designer." I think what he said about fitness for purpose and strategic judgment is absolutely critical in the 21st century, just like it was in the 18th. So what have we done in the Marine Corps? We've used those strategic imperatives to design a force to meet the needs of the national strategy, and we started this work back in 2010, actually. We designed it against a separate strategy, but against the very same threats that ultimately have been brought to bear. And so we designed a force of about 187,000 Marines that over time and with the distinct reality of budget pressures, we brought down to a force of 182,000. And that's the force that we hope to be funded in our current budget submission. In the latest strategic guidance, the Navy Marine Corps team meets at least a part of all 10 of the missions in that strategic guidance. But one of the critical missions of deterring and defeating aggression, the guidance says this: "In order to credibly deter potential adversaries and prevent them from achieving their objectives, the United States must maintain its ability to project power in areas in which our access and freedom to operate are challenged." It then talks about the ability to defeat anti-access and area denial environments. For the Marine Corps to meet this mission, we have designed a highly mobile expeditionary force that has to be maintained in a high state of readiness. To be that crisis response force, readiness is the key to our force being able to respond wherever and whenever needed. In the words of our Commandant, to respond to today's crisis with today's force today. To do the Tomodachi's and the Libyas and whatever else shows up on the horizon. We're forward deployed and engaged and focused on crisis response. Crisis response is our lane. We don't intend to dominate any individual part of the spectrum. We really look to dominate that crisis response lane, which traverses the air, the sea, and the ground. The amphibious part of the Navy Marine Corps team is critical to us being able to do that mission. There's no doubt about it. But let there be no doubt that the Marine Corps isn't sized against its ability to conduct amphibious operations. We are sized and able to be able to conduct the missions as laid out for us in the strategic guidance. So how are we going to fund that? We're going to do that by maintaining a balance across 5 pillars of readiness, one of which is modernization. And we have to modernize because we're doing now distributed operations. To put distributed operations in a nutshell for people in this audience, a battalion in Helmand Province in Afghanistan during COIN operations is covering a battle space that if it was centered in Washington, D.C., would stretch to Baltimore and stretch to Frederick, Maryland. 1 infantry battalion. The communications, intelligence, and ability to pass data to run and fight that in that expanded battle space takes an investment in modernization. So from our 5th generation STOVL aircraft that will present a challenge to those who would deny us access to our amphibious combat vehicle and our entire ground tactical vehicle portfolio, to the expeditionary radars and communications that I just talked about and command and control capabilities, we're modernizing the entire Marine Air Ground Task Force. As General Dunford said yesterday, we have to be ready for the unforeseen issues that often define our national security landscape. And to do that, we're getting after a 10-year view of how we're going to invest in that capability. From a strictly Marine Corps perspective, what does that mean for a size of the Marine Corps? It means a Marine Corps that consists of 23 active and 8 reserve infantry battalions, 18 active and 2 reserve fixed-wing fighter squadrons, ultimately all JSFs, 16 active and 2 reserve tilt-rotor squadrons, a mix of heavy lift and light attack helicopters, and the logistics and enabling organizations that we learned over the last 10 years of combat that are vital on the modern battlefield, to include upgrades in our cyber capabilities and our irregular warfare specialties in the Marine Special Operations Command. Marines, not equipment, are the central piece to that. We man the Marine, we equip the Marine, we don't man the equipment. In keeping the Marine capable of doing what Marines have done exceptionally well over the last 10 years, there's also an investment in our families. And so part of this investment strategy has to keep the good Marines around, that we have that quality nucleus in the 182,000-man Marine Corps, that should things change someday and we're required to expand, we have the ability to grow larger with a quality core of those key leaders in our non-commissioned officers and staff non-commissioned officers, as well as our junior field grade officers. The Marine Corps of today and tomorrow is a force that equips the man and doesn't simply man the equipment. It's a force with fitness of purpose, and it's a force that's designed with strategic judgment. It's also a force that everyone in here should know, while smaller than the force of 9/11, is infinitely more capable than the force was on the 10th of September of 2001. Thanks, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, good afternoon. Boy, I tell you, it's been a great forum, and I'm looking forward to participate in this panel. I think it's going to be a terrific wrap to this thing. I also look forward to the questions. I think that's really what it's all about. You know, we are products of our experience, and so I wanted to give you just a quick rundown of what's driven me a little bit in the Navy and the way I think. The perspective that I'm going to try to give to you today is one of deck plates. So we've been up, this is a strategy forum, we've been up pretty high, I come in here with a fleet commander background, 3rd Fleet on the West Coast, and then also a type commander perspective also in San Diego. But I'll go back one step further. I was the commander on the ground for Combined Joint Task Force Horn of Africa, and I think that's where I first got the appreciation for the power of expeditionary warfare. When you're steaming around in ships all your life, you talk about it, you study it, but you don't experience up close and front. And I had the opportunity to command Marines, Army, Air Force, Navy, some combined forces on the ground, and developed a different appreciation for expeditionary and all the capability that it brings. That's an important point. And I'll make it quick and leave you with this. I think everything that we do is about contact, because contact generates influence, and we can create stability regionally and impact globally when we influence world events in a proper way. I will tell you, when I tried to push different forces to different countries in East Africa and the Horn of Africa, whenever I used Army forces, it was difficult because they come with a footprint, they come with a bit of permanence, and it spent a lot of time and effort in working those issues with regional leaders to be able to do that. When I came with Marines, it was never an issue. They realized that they were in there with a very light footprint. They were scalable, they were adaptable, they provided superb training, and it was just a difference. It was a total day and night difference in what they provided. So think about our maritime forces and what we as a team, I'll throw Coast Guard in there too, that's an important piece that I also had the pleasure of commanding in HOA. We bring all kinds of ability to change the way people think about us, and that's important. So I did HOA, I did 3rd Fleet. 3rd Fleet is operations, and we have a very diverse group out here, so I'm going to talk a little bit in perhaps some simplistic terms about what each of the people do. And then I moved into what I think was the most complicated job, the one that I'm in right now, and that is that of a type commander. Again, we have 2 type commanders, 1 on each coast, and I'll get into that a little bit more also, but that's the business end of the Navy. Very challenging. The demand signal that we have from our combatant commands and our forward numbered fleet commanders, and the requirement that I have to provide readiness out there, which includes training of our sailors and material condition of the fleet itself. And boy, those are in competition when you have a demand signal for the best and most capable forces we have, and I think that's our naval forces out there. So I wanted to go back and say, you know, what are the goals for a Navy? What are we all about? And this is me and the way I think about things, and it shaped the way I functioned as a fleet commander and as a type commander. And first, I think we're about preventing war whenever possible. Preventing war, not necessarily winning. The second thing is protecting our nation, and the third thing is prevailing in combat when necessary. But again, it's protect, it's prevent, and prevail. 3 issues out there that are important. We absolutely have to have a Navy that is second to none. Credible combat power is an absolute essential. You got to make it clear that no adversary wants to take us on. We will prevail. We're a nation at war. We are still supporting combat operations today and will continue to do so. We are also prepared to counter other nations that are potentially at odds with our own peer competitors. That is an important piece. It drives a requirement for high-end capabilities. And then there's the ongoing threat of violent extremists. I would offer there's a third, we've talked about it a little bit, and that is one of uncertainty. The Tomodachi's, the Arab Spring, responding to those things with no heads up, no warning, and we have satisfied that requirement every single time that we've done that. It's huge and it's very powerful. Forward presence is an important thing. Forward presence will, in fact, prevent future conflict because we're out there and we're shaping things. Credible combat power is a ticket to provide that forward presence. Being there, not virtual presence, and maintaining readiness, all very important. Fleet commander's perspective. This is operations again. What's a fleet commander do? Plans, executes, and does the operations with the forces. He understands and he influences his area of responsibility. That includes maritime domain awareness, theater security, cooperation. maintains ship's material readiness to respond to any tasking across that complete spectrum of warfare. And he supports commanders, the combatant commander's direction and the demand signal that comes as a result of that. Tremendous demand out there in Fifth Fleet right now, 1.7, nearly 2 carrier strike groups at all times, a BMD presence. We are forward deploying MCMs, PCs, and USS Ponce, a forward staging base, to increase that presence out there to shape the environment. 7th Fleet equally challenging out there with a requirement for BMD, anti-submarine warfare, and theater security cooperation. Our challenge is to have combat ships out there ready to deal and to influence the requirement that we have, and I think we're stepping up and doing exactly that. I would offer another point for consideration is one of resilience, and resilience is self-sustainability against a dedicated adversary over a period of time. Comms denial, cyber attack, asymmetric threats. We all need range and depth weapons, redundancy to be able to handle that. Bottom line is we must be able to dominate our adversary. That's a high-end game that we need to play with. We need to have game-changing technology. Innovation is our advantage, adaptability, flexibility, fighting forward with forces that we have. And we are on a great course to do that. When you think about what we have with SM-3 ballistic missile defense, when you have SM-6 and NIFCA as it provides over-the-horizon capability, and our new Alpha Victor 15 anti-submarine warfare. But ultimately, we need to move into totally new next-generation weapons. I would offer that as energy weapons, lasers, electromagnetic railguns, high-powered microwave. I'm excited where we are, where we're moving, but that's really where we have to go. From a type commander's perspective, again, it's cost, and the cost is against time as well as the dollars. And so it's all about putting the right package together. There's a training piece, there's a maintaining piece, then it's moving forward to get folks out on deployment, and it's managing that friction out there. And again, that's something that we're doing, I think, doing very effectively. I would offer that goes to the design of what we're doing in new ships, being able to have consistency of design, redundancy built in, to do the man-machine-human interface pieces to cut down on the training required and the maintenance approach that we have to go forward with that. Margin, equally important, and when I talk about margin, it's space, weight, electrical power, cooling, the number of people that you can have on board. The ships that we build today, that we are building, the LCS, the LPD-17s, the DDG-1000s, all meet those requirements, and as we had in the earlier discussion, we have not done that in the past. And so we are at the point right now where we're leading to the future with great weapon systems that we have in place, but even more important, an easy adaptation and upgrade into the next generation systems of the future. And I think that's very, very important. I'd like to make a couple comments. One, technology is our friend. We ought to use it to work that, the weapons capabilities, to continue to advance those, but also to take technology and let them help us in the maintenance and operations efficiency side. We can design adaptability into ships up front, and again, I think that's what we're doing, and that is absolutely huge. Margin, as I said before, is essential for our future, and we're on a course to do that. Finally, I'd like to, as I said at the beginning, say that our goal ought to be to avoid war. That said, I believe we do that from a position of power. Now, we clearly dominate now, but we must continue to dominate in the future. And that puts me back to the comment on game-changing capability. It's not just an advancement of what we have out there, but it's things fundamentally new. This takes time and commitment. It's my view that our current developing weapon system sensors and ships have us on the right course, but my plug is greater development of lasers, railgun, high-powered microwave capability. Note that that isn't the platform, but the equipment that goes in the platform is something that we cannot afford not to move in that direction. And with that, I leave you hopefully with some questions out there for us that I'd be glad to address. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm at risk of, frankly, repeating a lot of what was said earlier, and I'll try to guard against that. But the good news is that we're all on the exact same page. I have the opportunity to touch on and talk with a lot of folks, industry, the Hill, the building, other services, and the one thing I'm able to hammer home is that we've got a great Navy Marine Corps team, and that's at the top, and it's all the way down through the ranks. That you could not slip. You couldn't slip a razor blade between us when it comes to our positions. And so it's a pleasure to join these folks up here. Usually when we're in this setting, it's Congress is on the other side of the table, and it's an entirely different atmosphere. I'd like to just give you a bit of the acquisition perspective and some framework. Let me start by saying it takes 30 years to build a fleet. It takes 30 years to build a fleet, which means that today we need to be recapitalizing the force that was built up in the 80s, okay? Point one. Two, the systems that we're fielding are far, far more capable than the systems that they're replacing, far more capable. And yet we strive to replace them on a one-for-one basis. So point three, the cost of these systems are growing at a rate far greater than inflation. We're replacing systems that are 30 years old with far more capable systems at a near one-for-one rate, and of course that's going to drive your costs up. And in that environment, the top line, in real terms, is coming down. Top line's coming down. We're recapitalizing the force of the 80s with far more capable and more costly systems. Meanwhile, we've been in combat for a decade, and we've got a lot of tired iron, whether it's armored vehicles or aircraft that have been flying at an accelerated rate. We've got a lot of tired iron that we've got to take care of. Our ability to protect the threat 10, 20, 30 years from now is extremely limited. We're making investment decisions for the future Navy with a very unclear picture of what that threat out there is going to be. And while we've enjoyed preeminence in the maritime, as was stated earlier, with a naval force that is second to none, we do have a rising peer that has tremendous resources and ability to put those resources to work to build up their capability, and they don't know that there's a Budget Control Act out there, and because there's no word for it in their language, they don't understand what sequestration might mean. And then finally, we cannot recapitalize our force at the expense of current readiness or wholeness for the fleet in being. What we've got to do is balance. We've got a limited budget. Top line, frankly, that's coming down. We're going to have to balance our investments to sustain current performance, but also build and develop for the future. It's a tough problem, and it makes clear several things. First, we've got to get the full service life out of our force, whether you're talking ships or aircraft, major platforms. We cannot simply buy our way to the future force. We're going to have to evolve our way to the future force. We're going to have to invest and hold our investments in maintenance and modernization, and then incrementally recapitalize. We've got to maintain our investment in those future capabilities that will ensure that not just today, not 5 years from now, but 10, 20, 30 years from now, in fact, we do have superiority on the sea and on land. We need greater run production from our investment decisions. A simple, painful example, but one that's easy to remember. A couple of years ago, we terminated the EFE program. We terminated the VH-71 presidential helicopter program, and we truncated the DDG-1000 program to 3 ships. If you were to take the dollars that were invested in developing those 3 major programs and instead buy aircraft and ships, we could have bought 2 Super Hornet air wings and a carrier to go with each one of them. Every program has got to be tagged with an affordability requirement, a cost cap, and the cost cap has got to be managed relentlessly, and it starts with development, goes through procurement, and continues through the life cycle. We've got to think in terms of cost and affordability as a requirement. Platforms and systems, since we aren't very well equipped for predicting the future threat in the far term, platforms and systems have to be adaptable, and they have to be leaned towards general purpose. We need the ability to aggregate our force, linking sensors and weapons to a far greater extent than we do today. You cannot look at the ballistic missile problem without being able to arrive at a solution that requires linking of overhead, radar, other sensors, bringing it to the shooter to be able to knock down the ballistic missile. Likewise, with this thing that we call a Navy Integrated Fire Control Counter-Air, whether it's from the air or from the sea, and you can extrapolate that right onto the ASW problem, the amphibious operations, mine warfare, ISR. And then lastly, we do need to leverage our allies' capabilities, because where we are, they are. And we've got to be able to aggregate our joint forces in such a manner that we can build towards this thing that Admiral Mullen used to refer to as the 1,000-ship Navy. So within this framework, I borrow a concept or a construct that Admiral Meyer used to harp on, and that is we don't have a fleet, we've got 3 fleets. We've got the fleet at sea today, he used to call it the fleet in being. We have the fleet that's in construction, and we have the fleet that's in development. And first, the fleet at sea today. From an acquisition perspective, we're talking Nimitz carriers, 688 submarines, Ohio-class ballistic and guided missile boats, Aegis cruisers and destroyers, the Perry-class frigates, a mixed amphib force of big decks, LPDs, LSDs, and then air vehicles, FA-18s, P-3s, Harriers, Standard Missile, Tomahawk. These are the legacy platforms that we're so familiar with. From an acquisition perspective, we're sitting at 285 ships. You read the long-term plan, we're trying to build to a force of 300 ships. Today, can be very complacent, no peer competitor. However, we can't be complacent. So we've got to take this 285 ship force and its aircraft, and we've got to invest in that maintenance and modernization to get the full service life. So it's the refueling complex overhauls for the Nimitz class. It's sustaining the modernization investment for Aegis, so in fact we can bring ballistic missile defense and get the full service life out of those ships. It's the outer wing assembly for the P-3. It's the midlife modernizations for the LSD-41s and the LHD class. It's FA-18 service life extension program. That's a heavy burden on our budgets, but we have got to do it. We have got to do it to ensure that today's force stays mission relevant and serves its full service life so we don't create a valley in terms of our force structure for the future force. The fleet in construction. Today we have about 50 ships in construction, hundreds of aircraft, and thousands of missiles, all significantly more capable than the systems that they're replacing. It's the Ford-class carrier. It's the Virginia. It's BMD-capable DDG-51s, the Littoral Combat Ship, the America-class Big Deck, the LPD-17, and a new class for our Maritime Prepositioning Force referred to as the Mobile Landing Platform, and the F-18s transitioning to the Joint Strike Fighter. The P-8 Maritime Patrol Aircraft is replacing the P-3, and we're bringing on board unmanned to the Maritime Patrol with the Broad Area Maritime Surveillance Aircraft and an incredible weapon system. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye is going to give us capability that you could only have dreamt of a couple of years ago. And a great force multiplier for the Marine Corps, the MV-22 has proven its worth today in Afghanistan. So from an acquisition perspective, #1 priority for the force in construction, affordability. Affordability. We've got to drive our costs down, whereas through the use of multi-year procurements, which in fact we've got more multi-year procurements right now that have gone through the hill than the other services combined to date in their history. That's a focus on affordability, but it's also a focus on stability of our requirements and driving that force to the fleet. The other key component, though, is transitioning this capability to the fleet. LCS is a great example. Coming to the fleet, we've got to be working together to ensure that when she arrives, the fleet's ready to put it to work, she's ready to deploy, and she can take on the missions that she's been assigned to. And finally, the fleet in development. The fact is that our research and development is the largest single investment account that we've got. It's focused on the next generation capabilities that are going to be necessary to win the next war. They're higher risk, but they're higher payback. What's paramount is that we make the right investment decisions on the front end today so that we don't suffer more reversals of course as we did with the EFE, the VH-71, the DDG-1000, because we don't have those resources to spare. We've got to make every dollar count. And that includes having a transition plan to take these smart investments and then to drive them to the theater, ultimately to the theater, working our way through procurement and through the introduction. In development, just like procurement, affordability is critical. So quickly, in summary, 3 fleets. What's necessary is a continuum. Develop once, put it to work across the 3. So today, we develop one Aegis baseline. It shows up in the fleet for ships in service. It also shows up ships in production. Virginia class, one APB program, one technology insertion program. It works its way across not just the Virginia class, but same technology insertion across other submarine programs. Bottom line, affordability is a requirement in order to service these gentlemen's requirements. If we don't nail it, we in fact are going to be suffering with capability shortfalls, force structure shortfalls, and this potential peer competitor will have no trouble in terms of matching our capabilities at sea.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have about 35 minutes for questions. And again, I'd encourage you to ask pointed and skeptical questions. Right here in the front, sir.
You mentioned that we have 50 ships under construction today. My understanding is in 1945 we were delivering multiple ships, 50 ships per year at this point in time, 50 ships under construction versus delivering multiple ships per day in 1945. By the same token, I understand that our back office, if you will, our procurement forces are an order of magnitude or multiple orders of magnitude greater than they were at that time. My question is, with the economies and efficiencies that we're putting on our fighting forces, have we done a zero-based budgeting look at the back office and make sure that despite the technology differences, we're as efficient in the back office as we are on the front lines?
I'd be hard-pressed to compare the back office in 45 with the back office today, so you have me at a slight disadvantage there. But what I would describe is, if you're talking about the workforce that underpins the procurement of our ships in this case, since the mid-90s, that workforce has come down by 45%. So in fact, there's been a lot of downsizing. The issue that we're wrestling with today, real time, is that as we look at drawing the force down in a post-OIF, OEF environment, what are we doing with the government workforce, civilian workforce at the same time? And so we're looking for the right balance. You said zero-based. In fact, we've done something very similar to a zero-based in terms of determining what our technical base needs to be to support the program, not just what we're building, but also what we're supporting in operations. And there's some puts and takes. What's very clear is we have needed to increase the oversight that we've got at our shipyards. We have a lot of crystal clear examples of where oversight was inadequate. So we're strengthening oversight in that regard. Technical authority. We have to strengthen our technical authority. But there are a lot of, I'll call them soft functions or traditional overhead functions that we're going after pretty aggressively to determine, okay, do we in fact, are we carrying too much overhead in the support of the development, the design, and the construction of our major warships?
David Spencer, Bedford, Mass. I'm sort of under the impression that we're the Committee of 12 really didn't get together, that your entire budget's under significant risk and that it could change at any point in time due to political factors. And as a business person, we run to budgets and so forth, but we don't usually face those kinds of things except sort of from the attack from outside. I mean, how do you budget when you really don't know which budget you're going to be on? I mean, what's that create for you in terms of organization?
Let me try that for a second. You know, the Department of the Navy is one of the Fortune 3 or 4. Depends on where you cut it. We have a $155 billion budget per year. That does not count overseas contingency operations funds. We have 320,000, 325,000 sailors on active duty. We have 202,000 Marines. We have reserves. We have another 200,000 civilians. It's an enormous enterprise. And on the best day, if everything works exactly right, we're creating a budget that's 18 months before the year of execution. There is not another business on the world, in the planet, that would work this way. So when you say, it truly is a government operation. So, on sequestration, what would happen if sequestration triggers? It's an automatic 10% decrement across all of the programs in the department. The net result on the Department of the Navy would be about $16 billion per year out of a $155 billion budget, a little bit more than 10%. To give you an expectation of what that would mean, that's about a year's of new ship construction, maybe about $16 billion a year in new ship construction. So we would lose that in an instant. It's very difficult to plan for such a future. The expectation of the Department of Defense is that our national leaders will address this problem and try to come up with a patch before it triggers, and then we would get into a very deep debate next year and solve this issue. So what we are expecting to do is sometime in the future we may have to plan for sequestration, but right now it would be so devastating it would require an entirely new strategic review. You could not absorb that type of a hit without changing the entire strategy. So Secretary Panetta has been very clear and he has been urging our national leaders to address this problem forthrightly. But you're right. In the best of years, we're trying to guess what's going to happen 18 months in advance. That's extremely difficult. Now we're faced with a wide uncertainty of maybe a 10% budget slice in an instant, and in the middle of a year of execution, in the midst of a continuing resolution. So it is a challenge. Would anybody else up here like to?
I just say that I think you're being optimistic.
Just to add one point about sequestration is the President has an option to exempt military manpower, and if he does, the 10% is actually worse against, and for a force that currently pays 58 cents on the dollar for Marines, by exempting manpower, you can see what a heightened effect that has on the balance of my account. I still get to pay the same bill, I just get to pay it against a much smaller portion of my top line. So it would be devastating, as the Secretary said. It would cause us to relook the strategy.
Jonathan Walker from the Defense Intelligence Agency. I'm a graduating student. In On War, Clausewitz teaches us that it is very difficult. One of the most important things that a statesman or a general can do is to understand the character of the war upon which we're about to enter. I would suggest that historically we have been very poor at that, certainly since World War II, at understanding the character of the war, even as late as the start of the war that we're entering. Is there any reason that the panel can give me to expect that we will be better at that in the future than we have been in the past?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take a shot at that. I really think that you've got a great point, and we're not going to get significantly better. That uncertainty is a key driver as we look forward, and so that's why it is so important to plan in adaptability. It's precisely the fleet that we're building right now with modularity, open system architecture. It's why we can move things in and out so you can adjust to the unknown. And I think that is something that needs to be in the planning and the development of anything that you make. You need to put margin into systems so you can, in fact, deal with other things, and that's the direction that we're going.
I think one thing I would caution is that I think even in this current fight, we went into the fight knowing what we wanted to get out in terms of military outcome. We knew what we were trying to achieve. The other thing that Clausewitz talks a lot about is fog and friction. Fog and friction is really the key. The force that can adapt to fog and friction is the force that then overcomes and achieves our objectives. I would offer that we have a great example of overcoming fog and friction in Iraq, where particularly where the Marines were in Helmand Province. that province looks nothing like it did even before the war under Saddam Hussein. Not widely publicized in our country, but something that certainly would bear your look. And I would offer that in certain parts of Afghanistan, there have been great, I think the ability to react to uncertainty is a part that the entire, not only the Department of the Navy, but all of Department of Defense has taken a very serious look at, and I think how everybody has designed their force to be able to react to uncertainty. You don't have to get it perfectly right, you just can't afford to get it perfectly wrong. And that adaptability is what's going to allow us to not get it perfectly wrong.
Let me, I just want to add the strength of the Navy Marine Corps team is, in fact, that flexibility, that adaptability. The force trains for every potential evolution. When in 2001, when Task Force 58 was assembled, they did not put to sea in the spring of that year anticipating that they're going to be flying 1,000 miles inland and assaulting the nation of Afghanistan, going after the Taliban. But yet they had the ability to do that. They had the ability to do that because of the training, the evolutions that they trained for are in fact so flexible, so adaptable to changing world conditions.
Jeff Thompson from New York. I guess this should be best addressed to Admiral Floyd. In our seminars today, we talked a good deal about the Chinese and their carrier. There's only one. But in your definition of Generation 5, there didn't seem to be a lot of emphasis on our carrier groups. And I wondered if you could comment on that, and if you have a moment to extend it to submarines.
The carrier is absolutely part of Generation 5 approach. I was kind of flashing through, so I was wrapping up the slides there at the end, but on the high-end side of our 5th generation battle force is the carrier strike group. So we're continuing to build those things on centers as we go out. That's the plan. Ford class brings a whole new capability of ship out there. We're going to see her out in 15, late 15. So the carriers are playing a key part in all of that. From submarine perspective, and for all you aviators out there cringing hearing an aviator start talking about submarines, should worry about that a little bit. But we recognize we're the new class of submarines that we're going to have to go to here in the future. We're planning for it. They're a key role as well, and they were also into that high end. But they're very flexible as well in their weapons loadout and what have you. So both classes ships are a key part in 5th gen planning.
Admiral Hunt, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, I would tell you that the submarines that we're building right now are absolutely superb. Virginia class is, second to none, and will maintain an advantage for some period of time. The surface fleet, our surface fleet, is also working anti-submarine warfare programs on a very accelerated basis. The Alpha Victor 15 system that's going out in the DDGs is just an incredible leap ahead. So we are taking it seriously. You combine that with the P8 program and BAMS and our ability to really do a netted anti-submarine warfare picture. I think we're positioning ourselves very well to handle any Western Pacific submarine threat.
Right there, uniform.
Mike Rokaw, U.S. Air Force. Just wanted to thank the Navy for inviting the Air Force to the air-sea battle.
You're totally welcome.
I have an acquisition question. I'm an acquisition professional in the space business. As a program manager, you're required to manage cost, schedule, and performance. You usually only get to pick one. Which one would you pick?
Well, let me, in the Navy, you don't get to pick just one. Okay? Look, right now, affordability is the key right now. It is the key. And we're having to, I'll call it, break some past models in terms of how we go after our programs. And literally get folks to get their foot off the accelerator on schedule, because we're at a stage where we can't afford to throw money after schedule. And so really it's arriving at the schedule that gives you the best cost outcome. And through all of that, hold your requirements stable. Don't let your requirements grow on you, and deliver what you promise. Deliver what you promise when it comes to performance. Schedule, with the exception of urgent needs, schedule becomes some trade space, and meet your cost targets. Okay.
Anybody in this section here? Okay, right here in the front, Dick.
Dick Diamond from Saunderstown, Rhode Island. We're about 25 years into the Goldwater-Nichols era now, and there's been some globalization among the services. The Army Air Defense has signed up to provide air cover for Marines going ashore. The Air Force provides some tanker support in Iraq and Afghanistan. What's changed in the world of coordinating the big picture of how these cuts across services and acquisition programs are coordinated to sort of make the, the whole sort of come out right?
I'll take a stab at that. I think that, at least from the experience I've had in working the budgets over the past and how things have gone through the process, all of these decisions are elevated to a body inside the Pentagon called the Deputies Management Action Group. A sitting member is the Undersecretary of the Navy, the other service unders, service vices, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and the Vice Chairman. And in that body, when it comes to program review, which is really what you're talking about, where we make sure that what we buy is balanced across that joint warfight, there is a very, I would offer, positive portfolio look at the capabilities and who can do what for who in the joint concept. And I think that's one of the things that we're rapidly evolving to in air-sea battle is the value of the joint warfight to create a total capability against an adversary in air-sea battle. So I think that from an operational perspective, Goldwater-Nichols has been exceptional. On the battlefield, my experience in 34 months in Iraq was that Army and Marines fought seamlessly on the ground. I took, in a number of my tours, air support from F-16s, from Special Ops AC-130s, from Air Force attack or Army attack helicopters, as well as a complement of Navy and Marine Corps air. So I didn't care who was dropping the bomb as long as it went in the right place. The point being, we do it in the battle space really well, and we're now getting after a really good, I think, portfolio look inside the Pentagon to make sure that we don't overexpense in one area and underexpense in another.
Can I just add one example? I mentioned the need to aggregate our forces in the future. A good example is a fleet test missile exercise that we ran with MDA, where what we were able to bring together was an overhead system that was an Air Force satellite system that was providing queuing data. It went to an Army TP-2 radar on the ground. It was passed to an Aegis ship that was then able to forward pass the shot, and at the same time to another Aegis destroyer. And at the same time, we had Japanese Aegis ships that were participating with simulated firings in the exercise. That's the kind of joint capability that we're going to need to bring to bear in the fight against these extremely complex threats. Couldn't have done it otherwise.
In this section, all the way in the back.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mark Whitehead from Chicago. I'm excited about the links and electrical things that you've talked about how you're going to communicate with everybody. Could you inform us a little bit about what we do to prevent hacking and interference and all those things that could disrupt that kind of a communication system, either with a conflict or without a conflict?
I can take a swing at that. I think, you know, you've probably seen that in I guess it's been about 3.5 years ago now, the Navy stood up the 10th Fleet Organization, and specifically to that kind of threat, protect our links, protect our networks. And it's going fairly well. A lot of focus on training as well as on systems, and we're going to be able to operate out there, I think, without any problems.
Admiral Hunt, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'd just say that, you know, we manage the electromagnetic spectrum as far as the communications themselves from a joint aspect. We've been doing that for at least a decade, and I think we do that very effectively. But you're right, it's a combination of both the cyber aspect of the computers and the communications path. And again, it is something that we train to. When we're doing our workups for strike groups as they go forward, we do a lot of interoperability for anybody that plans to go into the 5th Fleet AOR to do it across all the services. And I think that we have minimized that interference that you may have been familiar with in the past, and it's in a large part due to the jointness of the force now.
Yep.
I think it's a vulnerability that we're staring at, that the threat there is growing geometrically. And we are struggling to keep pace with it. It's moving very rapidly. The good news is it has the absolute priority across the Department of Defense and other agencies. And we have the best minds going at it to ensure that our systems remain secure and our communications remain reliable. But it's going to be something that we're going to have to continue to pick up the pace on because it's coming at us, the threat is coming at us every which way in cyber.
In the Cold War, we used to always think about EMP hardening our systems. In the future, cyber hardening of our systems is going to be a requirement. And I think that's what Secretary Stackley was talking about, and we're working at that very hard. This section here? Yes, sir.
Harry Weinberg from Boston, Massachusetts. My observation concerns something unsexy like support ships that will keep the sexy fleet at sea. A while ago, we took our mobile logistics support force, or most of the ships, and gave them under the command of MSC. My question concerns, number one, are these ships part of the total Navy count now? Secondly, what is being done to upgrade the support ships for the fleet of the future? Thank you.
Well, let me take the first shot. First, the MSC ships are not, when we talk about the 300, about 300 ship Navy, that does not include the MSC operated ships. And most of our support ships are in fact MSC crewed and operated. We are just completing just a great class of ships, the TAKE. It's a dry cargo auxiliary ship that is it's a tremendous asset. We're completing the 14th and turning that over to the fleet. We have our oiler fleet that our TAOs that we're looking at recapitalizing the back end of this this POM period, and basically start that recapitalization in a few years. That's necessary not just because of the age of the current legacy oilers, but simply to keep up with the what's referred to as MARPOL regulations associated with oil pollution and control.
Yes, sir, in the back.
Michael Finley, I'm in emerging markets finance in New York. Question for Admiral Pink.
It's Admiral Floyd. We just call him Pink.
I answered lots of things, though.
Same here. Trying to obey Secretary work and to ask uncomfortable questions. I'll trump DI Mance Clausewitz with Sun Tzu, know your enemy. What about that Chinese sub that popped up next to one of our carriers in the middle of a spherical awareness carrier group? Two things. Have we adapted so that can't happen again? And how annoying was it, really?
I think I recall the incident. That was one of our forward deployed naval force carriers that was transiting in and as I recall, a submarine popped up somewhere within the line of sight of the ship. I don't recall the specifics of that though, but I can tell you as a training strike group commander working for the 3rd Fleet, we spent a hell of a lot of time on that very issue.
Admiral Hunt?
Yeah, actually, Pink was my training guy at the time when that happened. You know, I think at any given time somebody can sneak through any defense that we've got out there, whether it's cyber, whether it's you know, real-world kinetic kind of stuff. But it is something that we have increased the training, the awareness to, and I think they'd be hard-pressed to get away and do that again just the way we operate out there. So it's a matter of focus, what you're paying attention to, and we are clearly on that right now with an awful lot of anti-submarine warfare work. It goes part, you know, I talked the Alpha Victor 15 array system that we have out there that probably increases our capability about tenfold over what we've had in the past. Those systems are being pushed to the Pacific, Western Pacific first with a priority fill as we do the upgrades. And that puts the highest level of capability forward into the area where you could expect to use it first. So we're doing all those kind of things, and we do adapt and continue to refocus depending on what happens out operationally.
Anybody? Yes, sir, right there in the uniform, last section, then I'll come back.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Lieutenant Commander Russell Thiem, student of the JMO. My research paper was on the LHA-1 America class new deck, large deck amphib. In my paper, I described that it didn't meet certain operational concepts such as power projection, sea basing, and operational maneuver from the sea due to the fact it did not have a well deck. Two questions. One, in my research, I also noticed that you're only going to build 2 of them. My question is, when the budget cuts come, which are going to come, is it possible that that redesign is not going to happen? And the second part of that question is, do you all see any challenges when it's actually introduced in the fleet in a couple of years?
I can answer the second one. I don't control the Navy budget as much as I would love to, but I'll let somebody else answer the question about LHA. I would tell you, from a Marine Corps perspective, I think that we're on very solid ground with LHA-8 having a well deck in it. I don't think there's any thought about going away from a well deck. My Navy partners are just as committed to that as we are. Certainly budget pressures can do a lot of things to the budget, but I don't even see budget pressures dealing with that. As far as the utility of that aircraft carrier, I would offer that your paper may have come to a wrong conclusion. I would offer that, no, and you're right, we can't launch amphibious things out of the bottom of that ship. That's not the exclusive, you see, it's not a one-ship amphibious task force. It's a collection of ships in the amphibious ready group that really make the power of what that force is, and that's scalable up to include MEB-sized force. Certainly would cause some restrictions if it was the only large deck in an amphibious ready group, but that's not the intent of how we would employ this ship from a Marine Corps perspective. If you look back to 2003, when we crossed north across the berm going into the liberation of Iraq, we actually had, I believe, 5 big deck amphibs, all sitting out in the Persian Gulf, each of them loaded to the gills with nothing but Harriers that were dropping bombs on bad guys and executing operational maneuver from the sea, that were in fact meeting ship-to-objective maneuver and the other tenets of our warfighting capability. So that ship, granted it doesn't have a well deck, and we could not build large deck amphibs without forever, but that ship will have a tremendous capability, and when it comes to fruition and we have a short takeoff vertical landing Stovall JSF F-35B that can fly off of that thing, the power of that platform will be exceptional in supporting the amphibious task force.
Secretary Steckley, you have anything?
I couldn't possibly improve upon that answer.
Well, let's go right down here. Yes, sir.
Secretary Steckley, you mentioned, Daniel Tice from New York, you mentioned the importance of ensuring that each platform has a full service life. Yet the Navy is about to retire 7 Aegis cruisers that are far from reaching the end of their full service life. Can you explain it?
Yeah, absolutely. Usually when I talk about the proposal to decommission the 7 cruisers early, I include the word bell ringer in the discussion. That decision, that is perhaps the most painful decision the Department of the Navy had to make in the in the 13 budget going over to the Hill. Those are, in fact, there are workhorses, there are senior surface combatants, they're extraordinary capability. But the cost of sustaining those ships in terms of the need to repair, modernize, crew size, all that goes with it, that cost broke the bank in this budget and drove that tough decision. So that is a tremendous example of the choices that we are facing and why it is absolutely critical that we drive affordability not just into the procurement of our programs, but into the development, the procurement, and the life cycle, and that when we make a decision that we're going to maintain and modernize it, that we stick by that decision. Those cruisers are sitting slightly past their midlife, looking at bills that are coming home in order to get them up to the level of condition that we need in order to be able to operate them, as the CNO would say, wholly for the balance of their service life, bills that we can't sustain. We can't allow that to become the pattern going forward. We have to break that going forward, sustain the investment in maintenance modernization, and then ensure that the front end, affordability, every engineer on every program better be a cost engineer to boot. Okay.
Yes, sir. And I think this is the last question.
Frank Pedrosa from Chicago. The prevent element, given that the key decisions that you have to implement are basically political, would you explain a little bit the role of prevent?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. When I talk prevent, it's about being out, being forward, understanding the space that we're operating in so we have better knowledge, better intelligence about what's going on. I think we have a great opportunity out there through theater security cooperation to contribute to regional security development when we do military-to-military training. We have the opportunity through some of our humanitarian efforts and civil affairs programs that we do out there to go after changing the conditions that foster terrorism. So there's a whole variety, a spectrum of different things that you can work that changes the dynamic out there, which you're absolutely correct, impacts at a broader level from a national perspective on giving more options to the President or to the National Command Authority as to how we go forward and operate.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this gives you a sense of the quality of the leadership in the Department of the Navy. I work with people like this every day. I'd like to thank them, and if you guys want to head on down.